G'day guys, Tyson from Head for the Hills here. Today I want to take you through 3 things that you can check on your bike to make sure that it's ready to race at the School Sports SA Mountain Bike Championships that are coming up pretty soon. I want to talk about the gears, the brakes, as well as something that you might not think about but is definitely worth paying attention to. Some of the things that you might find by going through these checks can just be a bit of a nuisance on race day, but they might also take you out of the race completely. So it's worth paying attention to your bike and going through these things step by step. And if you find an issue, feel free to fix it yourself if you know what you're doing. But if you don't, I highly recommend that you find a reputable mechanic that can help you out. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get stuck in. Okay, let's get stuck into the gears. Now, I understand that playing with the gears might be daunting for some people, but don't stress, we're not going to be changing anything. I just want to help you identify any issues that you might have while you still have time to get them fixed. So the first thing we're going to look at is your gear alignment or the cable tension. What we want to see is that one click on the gear lever up here at the handlebars corresponds to the chain moving one chain ring back here at the cassette. Now, the way to check this is to gently pedal the bike with it in a stand or perhaps someone holding the back wheel off the ground for you. And just change to the gears one at a time. And make sure that the chain is only moving one chain ring at a time. If it hesitates, or jumps more than one ring, that's a sign that there's something not quite right and you might need to get them tuned, or perhaps they're a little bit bent and that might be able to be fixed too. You want to be able to check your gears going up as well as down the cassette, because sometimes they work well going one way but not so much the other. And if you have a front derailleur as well as a rear derailleur, check both your left hand and your right hand gears. I've only got the gears in the back here today. Some of you might have gears up here by your cranks as well. The next thing that we want to check are the limit screws on the derailleur. Now, the limit screws prevent the derailleur mechanism back here from shifting the chain off of gear 1 and into your spokes, or on the other end of the cassette, off of the hardest gear and jamming on your frame. The easiest way to check this is to pedal the bike and put it into the easiest gear you've got, gear 1, and then try to change into an easier gear yet again. And by pushing on that gear lever, if your chain stays on gear number 1, you're sweet. If your chain decides to jump off of gear number 1 and into the spokes, that means your limit screw is not set properly. And what you want to do is stop that wheel as quick as you can, because what's going to happen is your chain is going to jam in the spokes, and as the wheel rotates, it's going to bring that derailleur up and around with it, and it's going to bend everything, potentially snap it, and very likely to be unfixable. So make sure you stop that wheel as quickly as you can if the chain drops off of gear number 1. If it doesn't and your limit screw seems to be set correctly, you want to check the other end of the cassette. And you do that by shifting through all of your gears until you get to the hardest gear. And if at this point it hasn't dropped off onto your frame, that's a really good sign. Another thing you can do is very gently give the derailleur a little bit of a pull towards you. Very gently, try and see if you can convince it to bring that chain off the smallest cog onto the frame. If that doesn't happen, you are golden. If you can convince it to make some weird noises or perhaps jump completely off the cogs, either by just shifting through the gears and it jumps off itself, or by giving it a very gentle pull, you're probably going to need that to be adjusted, because as you bounce down those rough trails, if you're on that gear, it's very likely going to be able to jump off that gear quite easily, jam on the frame, and that's your race over. While you're at the back of the bike, it is a really good idea to check the condition of your gear cable. What you're looking for is fraying, particularly around the pinch bolt here, or where it inserts into the outer housing here. If it's the end, this little tail, that doesn't matter. It looks a bit ugly. These end caps do have a tendency to come off, but it won't affect your gears. It just looks bad. If you do find some fraying, I highly suggest you get that gear cable replaced, because that fraying is only going to get worse and it happens pretty quickly. And if that gear cable does snap, you are going to be stuck in the hardest gear you've got, and it's not very much fun to pedal up hills in that gear. The brakes are a part of your bike that you are going to want working well if you're going to go racing. And there are a few things you want to consider. First of all, do they work, right? Check each brake individually to make sure that when you squeeze the lever, the brake actually engages with that wheel. The second thing to look at is, do the levers and the brakes return to their neutral position? Now, if they don't, and you have hydraulic brakes where there's fluid in the lines here, you're going to need to have that looked at, because there are a whole range of issues that could be going on there. If it's a cable brake where there's a metal cable inside this housing, again, a mechanic is going to be able to help you out, but it could just be a simple fix of replacing that line. Now, the next thing to think about is, how do they feel? So if you've got hydraulic brakes in particular, do they feel like they engage well, or do they feel spongy? Because if they feel a bit spongy and squelchy underneath your fingers, there's a high chance that you've got air bubbles in the line here, and that's what's giving it that spongy feel, meaning that you're not going to get that powerful braking down at the brake caliper and rotor. Another thing that you might want to consider when looking at your brakes is your lever setup. Think about how far away this lever is from the handlebar. You don't want to be having to reach too far for that lever, and you also don't want that lever sitting too close to your handlebars. And this can generally be adjusted fairly simply. Another thing to think about is, whereabouts on the handlebar have you got that brake lever clamped? If it's right up against your handle grip here, it's often very tempting to put 2, 3, even 4 fingers on those brakes, which for many reasons we recommend against. I like to set the brakes up so that you can only fit 1 or perhaps 2 fingers at the absolute most on those levers. It just makes for a much nicer braking technique. The last thing to consider with your brakes is, are they making an excessive amount of noise while you're riding? A little bit of noise is okay, but if they're really noisy, particularly in the dry, it could be that your brake rotors or brake pads have become contaminated with something. Now, that could be oil, it could be chain lube, or it could be something in a detergent that you've used to wash your bike, if you've used something like a car wash that has a wax component in it. Generally, stick to bike washes only, and if your brakes are really noisy and they have been contaminated, it might be that their performance has been decreased, and it could be decreased by a lot. So if that's the case, get your mechanic to check it out. They might be able to be saved, or you might be looking at replacing the brake pads, potentially the brake pads and the rotors, but it will be worth it, because you want those brakes to be working, particularly if you're going to be pushing yourself at a race. All right, this is a bit of a weird one, I'll admit, but it is important, and it blows me away how many times I see people riding around the trails with their water bottles hanging out the side of their bikes, or bouncing around, or lost out on the trails. You don't need anything fancy. What you want to get is a beautiful stock standard no frills water bottle that fits into your beautiful stock standard no frills water bottle holder. Nice and snug, it's not going anywhere. Perhaps I'm just showing my age, but I just see far too many funky sized water bottles, weird shapes, massive 1.5 litre things. You don't need them. They're only going to make your life hard. And if you bring your beautiful, expensive, fancy pants water bottle, you're probably going to damage it, or worse, lose it out on the trail and you'll never get to use it again. So leave the fancy stuff at home. No frills, stock standard, basic is what you want for race day. Well, that wraps it up for us today. I hope that it's been helpful and insightful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, you can reach out to us via email. It's info@headforthehills.net.au. We are here to help, so please feel free to contact us with any questions that you have. Other than that, all the best with your preparations. We'll see you on the trails.